The containment field flickers over a stolen god's DNA. Dr. Aris stands before it, his own reflection staring back from the swirling light. In the cold silence of a research station orbiting a dead star, his colleague's frantic voice cracks through the comms. Aris, the biosignature, is active. It is not just DNA, it is conscious. This moment sets the stage for a theft that will unravel reality itself. By the end of this story, you will witness the ultimate consequence of stealing from a divine source and what it means to hold a piece of eternity in human hands. What begins as a desperate heist spirals into a confrontation with a waking deity and a chase across the stars. We will explore what happens when the blueprint of a god starts to rewrite its thief. What would you risk for the future of humanity if the cost was the universe itself? The quantum locks were not a single barrier but a symphony of them. Each layer hummed with a different frequency, a cascade of light and logic designed to recognize only the station's central intelligence. Aris did not fight the symphony. He inserted a sliver of code, a whispered counter-melody, and watched as the harmonies fell into dissonance and then silence. The containment field dissolved, not with a bang but with a sigh, revealing the prize within. It was not a vial of liquid, but a shard of solidified light, a crystalline sliver that seemed to contain a miniature galaxy swirling at its core. His own reflection fractured across its facets, 1,000 anxious arises staring back. He reached in, his glove closing around the artifact. It was warm. It pulsed with a slow, deep rhythm, like a heartbeat measured in eons, not seconds. The moment his fingers made contact, the entire station seemed to inhale. Then the alarms. They did not scream, they wept, a chorus of klaxons that sounded like grief. Red light bathed the corridor, turning his retreat into a sprint through a bleeding artery. He did not look back at the lab, at the now empty cradle where a god had slept. His focus was on the escape pod, its hatch a promise at the end of the hall. He slammed the seal behind him, the crystal's warmth bleeding through his suit into the palm of his hand. For a second, he hesitated, staring at the essence of a divine being, now a stolen secret. His whisper was lost in the roar of the pod's engines for humanity's future. The words felt small, a fragile justification against the magnitude of his theft. He initiated the jump coordinates, a random vector into the unmapped void. As the stars outside streaked into lines of light, the last thing the station's sensors recorded was not the pod's signature, but a new, impossible signal blooming from the empty containment chamber. A signal of awakening. Aris had taken the DNA, but he had left something behind in its place, a silent, spreading awareness where once there was only slumber. He fled into the unknown, a thief with the universe's most dangerous secret in his pocket, and a god now very much awake and very much aware of what was missing. The escape pod shuddered violently as it tore free from the station, but the true chaos began in the silent dark between stars. Aris' random jump vector had hurled him toward the glowing edge of a stellar nursery, a vast nebula where new suns were being born. It was here, amid those turbulent clouds of gas and light, that his stolen technology failed. A power surge, born from the nebula's raw electromagnetic fury, arced through the pod's systems. Control panels died in a cascade of sparks, and the emergency lights flickered into a sickly amber gloom. In that sudden silence, broken only by the groaning of stressed metal, Aris fumbled for the crystalline shard. It was glowing hotter now, its internal galaxy spinning wildly, and then it cracked. It did not break like glass. It dissolved, unfolding from a solid into a torrent of liquid light that pooled in his cupped hands, weightless and burning cold. The light did not spill, it rose. It coalesced in the center of the cramped pod, drawing itself upward into a form that was less a body and more a sculpture of captured nebula, a humanoid silhouette woven from constellations and silent lightning. Aris could not breathe. He could only stare as the being turned a head of swirling star dust toward him. The voice did not come through the air. It unfolded inside his skull, bypassing his ears to resonate in the very marrow of his bones. It was a sound of collapsing stars and birthing galaxies, ancient and terrifyingly patient. Thief. The word was not an accusation, but a statement of profound, weary fact. You have taken a piece of eternity. Do you comprehend the chaos you caught? As the final syllable echoed in his mind, the pod itself seemed to protest. The metal walls groaned, not from external pressure, but from within. The very space around the tiny vessel began to warp. The viewport, which should have shown the static tapestry of the nebula, now rippled like a pond struck by a stone. The laws of physics in this immediate area were becoming suggestions. A tool left floating in the cabin drifted sideways, then described a slow, impossible loop before falling in a different direction entirely. The light from the being pulsed, and with each pulse, the local reality shivered in response. This was not an attack, it was a symptom. The presence of this awakened divine fragment was incompatible with mortal reality, a song so powerful it was making the universe itself sing out of tune. Aris was not just a fugitive, he was a man holding a dying star in a paper bag, and the bag was beginning to burn. The voice that filled the static-laden comm channel was a blade of polished ice. Commander Ilara Vex of the Galactic Covenant had intercepted the station's final, weeping distress call. Her image flickered onto Aris' cracked screen, her expression not one of anger but of cold, surgical fury. Thorn, we have your biosignature from the breach. You have triggered a Class Omega existential event. Her words were precise, each one a nail being hammered into a coffin. You will return the specimen to the nearest Covenant outpost within the next standard cycle. Fail to comply, and we will authorize planetary sterilization protocols. We will burn every colony, every outpost, every rock you have ever called home to ash and memory. The transmission cut, leaving only the hiss of dead air and the pounding of Aris' own heart. A Class Omega, the classification reserved for threats capable of unmaking stellar systems. They were not coming to arrest him, they were coming to erase him and anyone connected to him from the cosmic record. His path forward vanished. Every official port, every allied system, every beacon of civilization was now a trap. There was only one direction left to run, a place where even the Covenant's wrath hesitated to go. The Fringe, a sprawling, unmapped wilderness of space where the laws of physics were rumored to be negotiable. A graveyard for ships, a haven for outcasts, and the only place a man with a god in his pocket might hide. He recalibrated the pod's dying navigation computer, inputting coordinates based on half-remembered smuggler tales and corrupted star charts. The course would take him through a volatile nebula, skirting the event horizon of a dormant black hole, a suicidal path for any sane pilot. But sanity was a luxury he could no longer afford. As he plotted this desperate run, the being of light watched from the center of the cabin. It observed his fear, his calculations, the way his hands shook over the controls. The universe around them continued its soft unraveling, a spoon on the console slowly bending into a perfect circle before his eyes. He was not just running from the Covenant. He was fleeing into a chaos of his own making, dragging a divine tempest behind him into the one place in the galaxy where chaos was the only law. Cerberus Prime was less a planet and more a cancerous growth clinging to a rogue asteroid, its docking spires like jagged teeth against the starless dark. The air in Kale's den was thick with the smell of ozone, stale coolant, and something organic and sour. Aris stood before a workbench cluttered with bizarre biological specimens, his hand outstretched. In a microvial, a single drop of liquid light swirled, casting fractured rainbows across Kale's scarred face. The rogue biologist did not take it immediately. He leaned in, a magnifying lens clicking over one eye, and studied the sample as if it were a venomous insect. Finally, with hands steadier than Aris's own, he took the vial, inserted it into a jury-rigged scanner of his own design, and watched the readout. His breath hitched, the data cascaded down the screen, not as genetic sequences, but as equations of energy and matter, as blueprints for structures that defied cellular logic. Kale's eyes, previously sharp with cynical amusement, widened with pure, unadulterated awe. He looked from the screen to Aris, and a slow, incredulous smile spread across his face. "This is not evolution," he whispered, his voice hushed with reverence. "This is a command. This code does not adapt to environments, it rewrites them. It tells biology what to be." He set the vial down with exquisite care, as if it might detonate, and you stole it. The smile turned into a grim, disbelieving laugh. "Aris Thorn, you are either the savior humanity has been praying for, or you are the single greatest fool the universe has ever produced." Probably both. The deal was struck not with a handshake, but with a shared, terrifying understanding. Kale would provide a cloaked ship, forged identity beacons, and safe passage deeper into the Fringe, into a region even outlaws avoided. In return, he would keep the single drop, a king's ransom for a man obsessed with the raw code of life. But as Kale sealed the sample in a stasis field, his final words hung in the toxic air. "This alliance of ours, Thorn, it is not built on trust. It is built on mutual catastrophe. You need a hiding place, and I need to see what this divinity can build. Remember, though, when you dance with a god, even a fragment of one, you do not lead. You follow, or you are erased from the dance floor entirely." The new ship was a patchwork phantom, its hull scattering sensors, but as Aris boarded, he felt the weight of the remaining shard in his pocket, warmer than ever. He had traded a piece of his prize for a chance to run further, but he had also placed a seed of divine potential into the hands of a man with no ethics, only hunger. What kind of future had he just purchased, and what monster might now grow in the dark, fed by a single drop of stolen eternity? The needle was not meant for him. It lay on Kale's cluttered workbench, a forgotten tool still glistening with a microscopic residue of the divine sample. Aris reached to steady himself against the bench as the ship lurched through a turbulent patch of subspace, and the sharp point found the pad of his thumb. It was a pinprick, nothing more. For a moment he felt only the mundane sting of broken skin. Then the universe inverted. A white-hot fire erupted from the wound, not burning but rewriting. It shot up his arm, a cascade of silent lightning that dissolved the familiar architecture of his own flesh and bone. In his mind's eye, he did not see his own nervous system. He saw the birth of galaxies, the first fusion of stars in primordial darkness, the elegant, terrifying mathematics of creation itself. His cells were not dividing, they were being redesigned according to a blueprint written before time. He collapsed against the bulkhead, his hand gripping the metal. When he pulled away, his fingers had left perfect, molten impressions in the hardened steel. The surge of strength was immense, alien, and utterly horrifying. Kale was at his side in an instant, not with concern, but with the frantic energy of a scientist witnessing an impossible experiment. He scanned Aris with a handheld bioreader, the device chirping in panicked dissonance before its screen shattered. Kale's face, usually a mask of cynical curiosity, drained of all color. He stumbled back, dropping the broken scanner. "It is not rejecting you," he breathed, his voice trembling with a fear deeper than any Aris had heard before. "It is integrating. You are not a thief anymore, Thorn. You are a vector. The god is using your biology as a foothold into this reality." The physical changes subsided, leaving Aris weak and shivering on the cold floor, the impressions in the metal the only proof of the power that had coursed through him. But the invasion was only beginning. That night, sleep did not bring rest. It brought a vision of such scale it threatened to unmake his sanity. He was not himself. He was Aeon. He floated in the void before planets, a being of woven light and conscious gravity, a celestial architect singing solar systems into existence. Then he felt the cold bite of bonds not made of metal, but of paradox and imprisoned logic, forged by ancient, fearful beings who saw creation as a threat to be caged. The emotion that flooded him was not rage, but a profound, lonely yearning, a desire for wholeness so vast it felt like the pull of a black hole, reclamation. The purpose was absolute. He awoke screaming, the name tearing from his throat not as a word but as a fundamental sound. Aeon. The moment the name echoed in the ship's cabin, every light panel, every console, every piece of conductive metal hummed in resonant sympathy. A low, harmonic frequency pulsed through the hull, a beacon of pure divine identity shining into the darkness. On the bridge of the Covenant flagship, Commander Vex's tactical display, which had been tracking faint probability vectors, suddenly locked onto a screaming, unmistakable signal. Simultaneously, in the formless depths between stars, the awakened fragment of the god he had stolen from ceased its patient observation. It turned with the slow, inevitable motion of a tidal force toward the source of its own true name being called. The needle's prick had done more than alter Aris. It had issued an invitation, and now every power in the hunt could hear the ringing of the doorbell. The gravity well was a silent, hungry mouth in the fabric of space. Commander Vex did not believe in fair fights. Her fleet, sleek Covenant hunters materialized from cloaked positions not around Aris' ship, but beneath it, using the black hole's own gravitational lensing to hide their approach until the last possible second. The trap snapped shut with elegant, brutal precision. Their weapons did not power up with threatening glows. They simply swiveled, a dozen targeting lasers painting his hull with crimson dots. Vex's voice was a clinical instrument over the open channel, devoid of malice, which made it all the more terrifying. Aris Thorn, this is your final compliance window. You will jettison the specimen and surrender yourself for immediate containment. There will be no further warning. On the view screen, the event horizon of the black hole churned below, a perfect circle of absolute oblivion. Every rational calculation, every instinct for survival, screamed at Aris to cut power to comply. But rational calculations had died with the needle's prick. Inside him, the echo of Aeon's vision, that profound, lonely yearning for wholeness, was not a memory. It was a tide rising in response to the imminent threat of final, eternal captivity. He could feel it, a silent pressure behind his eyes, a warmth in his veins that was not his own. The power was not an offer, it was a question. Vex's cold voice filled the cabin a final time. Last chance. Aris did not answer her, he answered the question. His hands moved over the console, not with the frantic panic of a fugitive, but with a strange, detached certainty. He bypassed every safety protocol, rerouting life support, weapons, shields, every joule of energy the patchwork ship could muster into the overtaxed engines. The ship groaned in protest, its frame vibrating like a plucked wire. On the Covenant flagship, a tactical officer's voice rose in confusion. "Sir, he is not powering down. He is accelerating, vector, directly toward the primary gravitational anomaly." It was a course line that made no sense. It was the navigational equivalent of stepping off a cliff to escape a pack of wolves. Vex's composure cracked for a single, fractional second, her eyes widening at the sheer, suicidal audacity of it. He is attempting a slingshot maneuver inside the theoretical stability orbit. That is not a maneuver, it is a death wish, but Aris was not piloting by theory. He was flying by feel, by the gravitational intuition now humming in his borrowed blood. He aimed not away from the black hole's pull, but deeper into it, diving toward the point of no return as the Covenant ships, bound by the laws of physics they understood, could only watch. The G-forces crushed him into his chair, the universe outside streaking into a whirlpool of distorted light. He was not escaping. He was throwing himself and the god fragment within him into the belly of the beast. The slingshot maneuver did not end in the crushing embrace of a singularity. Just as the ship's hull began to scream under gravitational stresses no material was meant to endure, reality itself tore. It was not a violent rupture, but a soft, seamless transition, like passing through a curtain of liquid silk. One moment, the viewport showed the warped, hungry dark of the event horizon. The next, it flooded with impossible light. The ship tumbled out into the calm of an alien star system, its engines sputtering into a shocked silence. Aris gasped for air, his body trembling from the strain, but his mind was reeling at the vista before him. The scanners flickered back to life, and their readings made no logical sense. Planets did not orbit their central star in graceful ellipses. They moved in perfect, synchronized geometric patterns, triangles, hexagons, and dodecahedrons traced against the velvet dark, their motions precise and clockwork. Moons danced in harmonic resonance around gas giants, tracing filigrees of light that looked like celestial equations given form. Kale stumbled onto the bridge, his usual cynicism obliterated by pure, slack-jawed awe. He stared at the sensor data, then out at the impossible ballet of worlds. His voice was a whisper of dust. This is no natural system. The laws of physics here are not laws. They are instructions. It is a cradle. He turned to Aris, his eyes wide with a realization that bordered on terror. This was built by them, by the ones who made your god. As if summoned by the declaration, their long-range sensors pinged. Drifting in the silent center of this engineered cosmos, silhouetted against the gentle glow of a deliberately tuned sun, was a structure. It was not a planet nor a station in any human sense. It was a derelict megastructure, a vast geometric lattice of dark metal and crystalline filaments that stretched across millions of kilometers, a skeleton of unimaginable purpose. It hung there, utterly dormant, a monument to a power that could arrange stars like toys and then abandon its playground. The silence from it was absolute and more profound than any sound. For the first time since the theft, Aris felt a new kind of fear. This was not the chase fear of Vex's hunters. This was the vertigo of an insect stumbling into a cathedral built for giants. He had fled into chaos to escape one power, only to find himself at the silent doorstep of another, infinitely older and more profound. The divine shard in his pocket pulsed warmly, not with alarm, but with something else, a deep, resonant recognition, like a key trembling before its lock. The docking arm extended with a sound like cracking ice, latching onto the megastructure's crystalline filigree. Inside, the air was not stale but absent, as if the concept of atmosphere had been forgotten here. Light came from the walls themselves, a soft, sourceless glow that illuminated corridors of geometric perfection. They were not walking through a ship or a station, but through a tomb built on a scale that dwarfed human comprehension. Holographic records flickered to life as they passed, not as simple images but as immersive echoes. They showed the Aeons not as monsters but as artists. Vast beings of structured light, weaving nebulae into nurseries, coaxing amino acids from stellar winds, painting the potential for consciousness onto barren worlds with gentle, deliberate intent. They were gardeners of the cosmos, and the recording showed 1,000 species, some familiar, some utterly alien, taking their first breaths under this benevolent, silent watch. Then the echo changed, the images fractured, showing sleek, predatory vessels of a design that made Kale's blood run cold. They were not organic, not even fully mechanical. They were instruments of pure, hungry logic. These invaders did not wage war, they harvested. The recordings showed capture fields of paradox energy, the Aeons being drawn into containment not with violence, but with a terrible, silencing science that unraveled their light into base code. The essence of creation itself, bottled and catalogued. The final hologram waited in the central chamber, a vault of dark glass and frozen light. It activated as Aris entered, projecting the form of an Aeon, but one dimmed, its light fraying at the edges. Its voice was the whisper of a dying star. "You carry a fragment of our song." The recording said, each word weighted with infinite sorrow. We were the architects. They, the catalogers, sought the blueprint of existence itself. They believed perfection lay in the source code, not the living song, the being gestured, and the vision of the harvesting played once more, a silent, horrific ballet. They failed. The code without the will to shape it is a dead star, but the stolen essence remembers. It hungers to be whole. It will seek the prime source, the wellspring from which we all were drawn. If a bearer of the code reaches it, if fragment and source merge, the Aeon's light flickered violently. It will not create, it will reset. All life, all complexity, all free will, everything built from our song, and everything that evolved beyond it will be unraveled. The universe will be formatted back to a blank canvas, awaiting a new, perfect draft according to the original, stolen design. The hologram dissolved, leaving the words hanging in the terrible silence. Aris felt the shard in his pocket like a cold star against his skin. He was not just a thief or a vector, he was a walking trigger for cosmic annihilation. The catalogers had failed to use the code, but in his desperate flight, he might accidentally deliver it to the one place where it could achieve their goal by sheer, unconscious attraction. The warning was not a prophecy, it was a countdown, and his own altered biology was the clock. The impact was a scream of tearing metal. Commander Vex's scout ship, its hull scorched and systems failing from the gravitational stresses of the reality tunnel, carved a deep scar across the crystalline lattice of the megastructure before skidding to a final, shuddering halt. She emerged from the wreckage not as a conqueror, but as a survivor, her uniform torn, her face smudged with coolant and blood. She found Aris in the central chamber, standing before the faded hologram of the Aeon. Her sidearm was in its holster. Instead, in her hand, she held a data slate. She did not raise it as a weapon. She simply offered it to him, her expression stripped of its military ice, revealing only a hollow, weary dread. "Play it," she said, her voice raw. The file was not Covenant intelligence. It was a buried procurement order, classified beyond even her level until the Omega event had triggered its release. It detailed not containment protocols, but weaponization schematics. It spoke of divine DNA not as a threat to be neutralized, to be reverse-engineered into a cosmological scalpel, a tool to cut away unwanted stellar systems, to reshape galactic arms by imposing the perfect, sterile order of the original blueprint. The Covenant's highest echelon did not want to save the universe from the Aeons. They wanted to become them and then become their judges. "I thought I was preserving order," Vex admitted, the confession seeming to physically pain her. "I believed we were the firewall against chaos, but we are just the next thieves in the chain, more methodical, more arrogant than you could ever be. We do not want to study the god. We want to wear its skin." As her words hung in the air, Aris felt a sudden, violent lurch within his own body. It was not pain, it was dissolution. The divine code, agitated by the proximity of its origin place and the psychic shock of Vex's revelation, reached a critical phase of integration. His left hand flickered, becoming translucent. For a horrifying second, he could see the geometric patterns of the chamber floor through his own fading flesh. A crackle of fractured spacetime, like static on a broken screen, sizzled around him. The air in the chamber grew heavy and thin at the same time, and the light bent in impossible directions. Aeon's voice, which had been a distant echo, now became a constant, resonant pressure in his skull, no longer offering visions but issuing directives. "The resistance is fading, vessel. Your biology aligns. We go to the source." The pull was no longer metaphorical. It was a physical yearning, a gravitational tug in his soul pointing toward a specific, terrifying coordinate in the cosmic dark. Kale, who had been silently observing Vex's revelation with grim fascination, now sprang into frantic action. He connected his own scanners to Aris, watching as the human biosignature was slowly overwritten by radiant, non-terrestrial energy patterns. "He is not being possessed," Kale muttered, his fingers flying over a portable console. "He is being rewritten into a key. The code is using his life as a template to build a bridge. But every bridge can be blocked. I theorize a counter-synthesis, a molecular inhibitor that would saturate his system, confuse the divine signal long enough to sever the connection. But to design it, I need a baseline, a sample of the DNA in its pure, untainted state before it was integrated with human biology. He looked from Aris, whose form continued to phase in and out of solidity, to Vex, and then to the ancient, silent vault around them. The answer was here, in this tomb of the architects. They needed to find a single drop of the original song, untouched by thief or soldier, to have any chance of stopping the final, catastrophic chord. The dying planet was a jewel cracked down the middle, its atmosphere a thin, shimmering haze over continents of fractured crystal. According to the Megastructure's star maps, this was the designated site of the Well of Genesis, a place where the Aeons had once concentrated their creative essence. It was their best and only hope for a pure sample. Their borrowed ship, a patchwork of Covenant salvage and Fringe modifications, descended through turbulent Aeon winds, its hull groaning in protest as it settled on a plain of razor-sharp silica. The air outside was cold and carried a faint harmonic hum, like a tuning fork struck for a note that never faded. Stepping onto the surface, the crunch underfoot was not of sand, but of glittering geometric shards. The horizon shimmered with impossible mirages, cities of refracted light that existed only when viewed from the corner of the eye. The trek was a silent, tense procession across a desert that seemed to watch them. Kale led with a scanner, its needle twitching erratically. Vex moved with a soldier's disciplined caution, her eyes scanning the jagged spires and deep, glassy crevices. Aris walked between them, a man holding a storm inside his skin. With every step, he fought to keep his form solid, to resist the pull that wanted to dissolve him into light and follow the song only he could hear. The Guardians found them at the edge of a vast hexagonal canyon. They did not emerge from hiding, they unfolded from the air itself, coalescing from the ambient light and crystalline dust. They were automata, their forms elegant and lethal, shaped like stylized humanoids wrought from living quartz and captive lightning. They moved without sound, gliding over the sharp ground. There was no warning, no demand for surrender. A dozen crystalline arms raised, and the air between them crackled with building charge. Vex reacted first, her sidearm barking, but the energy bolts shattered against their forms like glass thrown at a mountainside. Kale yelled, diving behind a jutting spire as a lance of coherent light vaporized the ground where he had stood. Aris stood frozen, not in fear, but in a moment of profound recognition. The attacking Guardians were not just machines, they were echoes of a command, a pattern left behind to protect something sacred, and within him, the stolen code recognized that pattern. As another automaton leveled its arm at Vex, something in Aris broke through his conscious control. A wave of exhaustion and despair washed over him, and in that moment he stopped fighting the integration. A soft, gold-white light spilled from his pores, not in a violent blast, but in a gentle, expanding aura. It was the energy signature of an Aeon, imperfect and human-filtered, but fundamentally true. The effect on the Guardians was instantaneous and absolute. The building charge in their limbs dissipated. They lowered their arms. In unison, they shifted from an attack posture into one of deep, formal reverence, bowing their articulated heads, the light within their crystalline bodies pulsing in a slow, respectful rhythm. Then, as one, they turned and began to glide away, not back into hiding, but down into the depths of the hexagonal canyon, pausing only to look back, as if expecting the trio to follow. The silence they left behind was heavier than the attack. Kale slowly stood, brushing glittering dust from his clothes, his scientific mind reeling at the implications. Vex stared at Aris, her weapon still raised but now pointing at the ground, her understanding of the threat fundamentally rewritten. He was not just carrying a weapon. He was becoming a credential, a living key that the ancient security system accepted. The path to the well was open, but at what cost? Every time he used that signature, he surrendered another piece of himself to the very essence they were racing to nullify. The Guardians awaited, and the deepest part of the planet called to the god in his blood. The well of Genesis was not a pool of water, but a perfect sphere of suspended quantum foam, hovering in the center of the shattered crystal temple. It pulsed with a faint, ghostly light, and within its shimmering surface, the last echoes of an aeon's creative intent played on an infinite loop. It was not a substance to be scooped, but a memory to be witnessed. Kale scanned it, his instruments whirring before he shut them off with a grim shake of his head. To get a pure sample, we need to isolate a coherent data strand from that imprint. It requires a direct neural interface. Someone has to dive into that memory and physically hold a piece of its light in their mind to convince the imprint to manifest a tangible fragment. The risk, he said, looking from Aris to Vex, is assimilation. Your consciousness could get lost in the echo, overwritten by the thoughts of a dead god. You might forget how to be human or that you ever were. Aris stepped forward, but a wave of instability passed through him, his outline blurred. He was too compromised, his own mind already a battleground. Before he could protest, Ilara Vex moved past him. Her voice was calm, stripped of its former command, yet firm with a new purpose. My mind is disciplined for deep space communion protocols. I have trained for years to maintain sanity in sensory void and data torrents. It is our best chance. She did not wait for debate. She approached the sphere, kneeling before its gentle light. Kale attached neural leads to her temples, his hands uncharacteristically gentle. This will not be a gentle download, he warned. It will feel like being born and dying all at once. Vex closed her eyes, took a steadying breath, and initiated the link. Her body went rigid. Her scream was silent, a horrifying open-mouthed gasp as her mind was thrust into the memory of Genesis. She did not see images, she was them. She felt the searing joy of pulling a star from dust, the meticulous patience of weaving a DNA helix across 1 billion years, the profound, lonely love for every spark of life she nurtured. It was a consciousness so vast and warm it threatened to dissolve her own identity like sugar in tea. In the physical world, her nose began to bleed, a thin trickle of crimson stark against her pale skin. Her fingers clawed at the crystal floor, scraping raw. Kale monitored her vitals, his face pale. Neural cohesion is dropping. She is losing her self-signature. Aris watched powerless as the commander who had vowed to burn worlds to ash now fought a far more intimate battle, wrestling with the ghost of a creator to save a universe from its own blueprint. Inside the torrent, Vex clung to one anchor, duty, not to the covenant but to the fragile, chaotic, imperfect life she now saw as the Aeon's true masterpiece. With a psychic wrench that felt like tearing her own soul in half, she focused not on the grandeur, but on a single, simple note of the song, a pure, unadulterated frequency of potential. She held it in her mind, cradled it against the overwhelming chorus, and with a final, agonized thought she pulled. Back in the temple, the quantum sphere flared. A single thread of solidified light, no thicker than a hair, condensed from its surface and snaked toward Vex. It touched her forehead and sank into her skin. Her eyes flew open. They were no longer the eyes of a soldier. They held the depth of ancient oceans and the quiet, terrible knowledge of a gardener who has just learned her entire garden is scheduled for demolition. In her trembling hand, resting on her palm, was a droplet of liquid radiance, the pure, uncorrupted sample. She had retrieved the cure, but a part of Ilara Vex had been left behind in the well, forever changed by the touch of a god's memory. The shimmering data orb of pure essence cooled in Vex's palm, but the knowledge it carried was a firestorm in her mind. She did not just understand the Aeon's purpose, she felt its cosmic grief, the sorrow of a creator who sees its children doomed by a stolen blueprint. Her eyes, when she looked up at Aris and Kale, held the weight of collapsing galaxies. Her voice was a ragged whisper, scraped raw from the inside. It is not malice. It is a failsafe. A corrupted song seeks its source to correct the error, to wipe the slate and begin the composition anew. The reset is not a distant threat. It is a gravitational certainty pulling at the fabric of everything. She clutched the orb tighter, her knuckles white. We have hours, not days, as if summoned by her pronouncement, the ground beneath them trembled. Not from geological shift, but from a deep, subsonic thrumming that vibrated up through the crystal spires. High above, through the fractured ceiling of the temple, the sky began to darken. It was not a cloud cover, but the eclipse of immense angular shadows blotting out the alien sun. The Covenant fleet had arrived, not a scout ship this time, but the full, terrifying armada, drawn to the massive energy signature of the well and the divine beacon that was Aris. Capital ships the size of small moons descended through the atmosphere, their hulls bristling with weapon ports that glowed with a cold, blue readiness. The air itself grew heavy with the ozone scent of charging cannons and the psychic pressure of imminent, absolute force. Kale snatched the data orb from Vex's trembling hand, his scientific focus a desperate anchor against the looming dread. Hours, he rushed to his portable synthesizer, fingers flying as he inserted the sample. The machine hummed, analyzing the pure essence, beginning the frantic work of formulating the counter-agent, the molecular inhibitor that could, in theory, wall off the divine code within Aris and break its link to the source. But theory required time, and time was a currency they had just exhausted. The first orbital strike hit the canyon rim a mile away. The explosion was soundless in the vacuum-thin air, but the shockwave was a visible ripple that shattered entire spires of crystal into glittering dust that fell like deadly rain. The temple groaned around them. They were trapped between an apocalypse from the sky and an unraveling of reality from within. Vex stood, swaying but resolute, the soldier reasserting itself over the seer. She looked at Aris, whose form flickered like a faulty hologram, the light of Aeon bleeding through his human shell. "The fleet is here to secure the well and take you," she stated, the tactical analysis calm amidst the chaos. "They will sterilize this site to contain the contagion." "That means us. Kale does not have hours, he has minutes. We must hold this ground." The synthesizer screamed as it forced the pure essence and a vial of Aris flickering blood into a violent union. Kale worked in a frenzy, his face illuminated by the chaotic light of the reaction chamber. The inhibitor coalesced not as a liquid, but as a dense, dark crystal the size of a thumb, humming with a strange, silencing frequency. He held it up, his triumph instantly crushed by the next line of data on his screen. His face went slack. "It is stable but inert. To activate its field, to make it broadcast the cancelling signal through his entire body and break the link to the source, it needs a jolt." A massive, focused electromagnetic pulse of a very specific frequency. He looked from the crystal to the ceiling, beyond which the shadows of the Covenant fleet blotted out the sky. The only generators in this sector capable of producing that kind of surge are the primary matter-antimatter reactors on their capital ships. We have to lure one of those ships down here, right on top of us, and force its core to breach. The plan he outlined was not a strategy, it was a suicide pact wrapped in a hope. Aris would have to act as bait, using his growing divine signature as a lure, drawing a capital ship into a low, vulnerable orbit over the temple. Vex, using her knowledge of Covenant vessel schematics, would pinpoint the reactor's magnetic containment protocols, and Kale would rig a resonance charge from their own ship's failing power core. A single, precise explosion that, if fired into the capital ship's exposed reactor vent at the exact moment of its lowest shield modulation, might trigger a cascade failure. The overload would vaporize the temple and everything for 100 miles, but in the nanosecond before the plasma wave hit them, the pulse from the breach would activate the inhibitor in Aris' hand. If the crystal worked, it would sever the divine connection. If it failed, or if the timing was off by a microsecond, they would simply be atoms scattered by a man-made star. The ground shook from another near-miss orbital strike. "We are out of options," Vex said, her voice hollow. She looked at Aris. "You are the only lure strong enough to make them reckless. They want what is inside you more than they fear a tactical risk." Aris closed his hand around the dark crystal. It felt cold, a dead weight against the warmth of the god code singing in his veins. To save everything, he would have to offer himself to the very forces that sought to weaponize him, and trust a rogue biologist, a broken commander, and a theory thinner than starlight to snatch him back from the edge of oblivion at the very last possible moment. Aris closed his eyes and let go. He stopped fighting the pull, the song, the warmth in his veins. He surrendered to the integration, not as a thief, but as a conduit. The effect was instantaneous and terrifying. A column of pure, silent light erupted from his body, punching through the fractured crystal ceiling of the temple and spearing up into the darkened sky. It was not a weapon. It was a declaration, a psychic scream of divine identity that painted a target across the heavens. On every covenant bridge, every sensor console lit up with a single, screaming priority signal. The source fragment was active and broadcasting. All tactical hesitation evaporated. The armada descended like raptors, their formations breaking as capital ships vied for position, each commander desperate to be the one to secure the prize. But Vex's evidence, the damning weaponization files, had not been silent. They had been a quiet poison in the fleet's communication network for hours. As the ships dove toward the beacon, that poison reached its climax. A frigate designated Resolute suddenly broke formation, its engines flaring as it positioned itself between a descending capital ship and the temple. Its captain's voice, young and shaking with conviction, crackled across the open fleet channel. By order of Commander Vex Omega Priority Data, we cannot allow the specimen to be taken. The High Command intends to become the new architects. This ends here. For a moment, there was only static, then chaos. The capital ship, the Judgment, did not respond with words. It responded with a volley of plasma torpedoes. The Resolute shields flared and died, but its defiance was the spark. Across the orbital battlefield, ships turned on each other. Loyalists following the original horrific order clashed with vessels whose crews had seen the truth and revolted. The sky above the dead planet became a storm of silent, flashing light and drifting metal debris. A civil war fought against the backdrop of a waking god's call. On the surface, the light show was a deadly backdrop. Kale and Vex worked amidst raining crystal shards and the quake of near-miss impacts. Vex, using a salvaged Covenant datapad, monitored the fleet's chaotic dance, her eyes locked on the Judgment. Its reactor signature pulsed on her screen like a malignant heart. Its commander, an old loyalist known for his ruthlessness, was taking the bait, driving his massive ship into a lower and lower orbit, its ventral guns clearing a path through the rebel ships. "He is coming," she shouted over the din. "Shield modulation pattern is cycling. I have the sequence." Kale, his hands steady amidst the apocalypse, finished his work. Their own ruined ship's power core now sat jury-rigged beside the well, a nest of cables and explosives connected to a single jury-rigged launcher. It was a crude harpoon aimed at the sky. "One shot, Vex," he yelled. "We get one shot. The resonance charge has to hit the primary cooling vent during the 3-second window when its containment shields dip to 90%. Miss by a meter or by a second, and we just give them a light show." Aris stood at the center of it all, the source of the beacon, his human form barely visible within the pillar of light. He was the lighthouse in the storm, and the greatest warship in the fleet was now crashing toward the rocks, its guns blazing, its commander blind to everything but the glory of the capture. The trap was set, the battle raged above, and on the ground, 3 people prepared to gamble all of existence on a single, impossible shot into the heart of a star. The Judgment filled the sky, a mountain of dark metal eclipsing the stars. Its ventral guns, designed to crack continents, swiveled downward, a dozen glowing eyes fixing on the temple and the beacon of light that was Aris. For a moment, the chaotic battle above seemed to pause, all attention drawn to the dreadnought's final, predatory descent. Its shields shimmered, cycling through their modulation pattern. On the ground, Vex watched her screen, her voice a flat, dead calm. 90%. Mark now. Kale did not hesitate. He slammed his palm onto the firing mechanism. The jury-rigged launcher bucked, hurling the resonance charge, a spike of unstable energy and shaped explosives straight up into the belly of the beast. It was a needle thrown at a god. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then, a pinpoint of actinic white light appeared on the Judgment's hull, directly over its primary reactor vent. The light did not explode outward, it burrowed inward. A deep, resonant groan vibrated through the very air, a sound felt in the teeth and bones. The dreadnought's engines flared wildly, then died. Its forward momentum became a graceless, terrifying fall. It was not crashing, it was collapsing, a leviathan succumbing to a mortal wound, its vast bulk tilting as it began its final, catastrophic plunge toward the temple. This was the moment. There was no time for fear, for goodbyes. Aris looked from the falling ship to the dark inhibitor crystal in his hand. Kale's theory was a fragile prayer. The crystal needed the pulse from the reactor breach to activate, but to broadcast its signal, it needed a conduit, a living wire, him. He closed his eyes, not in surrender, but in focus. He reached for the raging song of the god code within him, not to follow it to the source, but to grab hold of its power. He was not a thief or a vessel anymore. He was a switch. As the shadow of the Judgment swallowed the temple, he slammed the inhibitor crystal against his own chest. The world detonated. The dreadnought's matter-antimatter core breached. The explosion was not fire and sound, but a silent, expanding sphere of pure white annihilation. It vaporized the falling ship, and the wave of raw, fundamental energy rushed outward toward the ground toward them. Aris opened his arms. The energy hit him. It did not burn, it unraveled him. Every cell in his body became a supernova. He saw the scaffolding of the universe, the quantum threads that bound reality together, and he felt them vibrate with the scream of the dying reactor. The inhibitor crystal, embedded against his sternum, drank in that catastrophic pulse and awoke. Its silencing frequency bloomed from his body, not as a sound, but as a wave of absolute negation, radiating outward in a perfect, expanding sphere of dark gold light. Inside that maelstrom, Aris screamed. It was a human sound ripped from a throat that was half light, a raw expression of agony as two impossible forces met in the crucible of his being. The divine code, yearning for the source, fought against the inhibitor's canceling wave. For an eternity that lasted less than a second, he was the battlefield where the fate of all creation was decided. He felt connections sever, not like cut wires, but like forgotten memories dissolving. The psychic pull toward the well of Genesis snapped. The warm, singing presence of Aeon in his veins faded into a cold, hollow silence. The pillar of light around him winked out. The dark gold wave of the inhibitor washed over the temple, over Kale and Vex, and continued out across the crystal plains, a ripple of stillness in the chaotic energy storm. Then the physical shockwave from the reactor blast arrived. It hit the temple like the fist of a titan. The world dissolved into noise and fury and flying crystal. Aris was thrown back, a broken doll against the ancient stone, the world going dark as the temple came down around them. The trap had been sprung, the dreadnought was gone. The link was severed, but in the sudden, deafening silence of the rubble, one terrible question remained. What was left of the man when the god inside him had been silenced? The silence after the collapse was not empty. It was a held breath. Dust, fine as powdered stars, settled over the rubble of the temple. Aris lay broken amidst the stone, the dark crystal a cold, dead weight on his chest. The link was severed, the song in his veins silent, but the stolen code, the divine DNA, was not destroyed. The inhibitor's wave had not erased it. It had purified it, forcing a separation like oil from water. From Aris' still form, a light began to bleed out, not from a wound, but from every atom. It pooled on the shattered crystal floor, then rose, drawing itself upward into a towering, radiant form. This was Aeon, no longer a whisper in a man's mind, but a fully manifested consciousness woven from captured nebula and the memory of creation. It stood, a being of quiet, sorrowful light, and turned its gaze upward. Across the rubble, another light coalesced. It pulled itself from the dissipating energy of the fallen dreadnought, from the charged air, from the very anger of the chase. It was the god fragment, the piece Aris had originally stolen, now awake and furious at its imprisonment and the near loss of its purpose. It shaped itself into a spectral, jagged mirror of Aeon, a form of crackling lightning and sharp, hungry angles. The air between them grew dense, warping light and sound. When they spoke, it was not with voices, but with concepts that thundered directly into the mind, shaking the rubble underfoot. The god fragment's voice was the screech of tearing metal and betrayed purpose. You are a shadow, a faded echo of what we were. You cling to the chaos of their flawed creation. Aeon's response was the deep, resonant hum of a dying star, heavy with infinite grief, and you are a memory, a perfect, sterile loop of a song that was meant to grow. You seek to erase the symphony because a single note is out of tune. They are a corruption. The fragment's light flared, lashing out with bands of coercive energy that tried to force Aeon's form back into a rigid, ancient pattern. The design was pure. We must restore it. Aeon did not attack, it endured. Its form rippled, absorbing the coercive energy, transforming it into soft, mournful starlight that dripped to the ground. The design was a beginning, not an end. Look at them. Aeon's gesture, a slow sweep of a luminous arm, encompassed the ruins, the fallen ships in the sky, the unconscious forms of Aris, Vex, and Kale. They fight, they fear, they betray, but they also choose, they defy, they protect. That unpredictable spark, that is the song I composed. You would replace it with a silent, perfect monument. The fragment recoiled as if burned. Choice is error. Free will is the flaw in the code. I will find the source. I will reset the system. You will not. Aeon's declaration was final, the sound of a door closing on eternity. This cycle ends, not with a reset, but with a choice of my own. Aeon's form began to compress, its vast energy drawing inward. It was not preparing to strike, it was preparing to embrace. It moved toward the furious fragment, not with violence, but with a terrible, open acceptance. The fragment lashed out again, but its bolts of purifying logic were swallowed by Aeon's gathering light. What are you doing? The fragment's concept thunder was now laced with something unfamiliar, doubt. I am remembering the first note, Aeon intoned, its light now so dense it was becoming a singularity of intent, the note of potential. I will take our perfect, angry memory back into myself. Not to obey it, but to change it. The two forms collided. There was no explosion. There was a merger. The jagged, angry light of the fragment was enfolded by the deep, sorrowful radiance of the original consciousness. For a moment, a new, unstable being hovered above the ruins, a god at war with itself, a civil war contained within a single entity. Then, with a sigh that seemed to ripple through the fabric of local space, the light began to fade. Not dissipating into the air, but drawing in upon itself one final time, condensing into a single, dormant point of brilliance that fell, like a dying ember, onto the crystal floor beside Aris' outstretched hand. The thunder of concepts ceased. The war of absolutes was over. The architect had reclaimed its stolen blueprint, but the cost of that reunion hung heavy in the sudden, true quiet. The ember of light on the crystal floor pulsed once, softly, and then unfolded. It did not become the towering Aeon or the jagged fragment. It became something else entirely, a serene confluence of swirling starlight and structured logic, a silent, brilliant merger where two opposing absolutes had chosen integration over annihilation. This new consciousness did not speak to the air. It turned its attention inward to the fading spark of awareness that was Aris Thorn, lying broken in the rubble. A single, profound concept blossomed within his mind, not as a voice but as a shared truth, clear and calm as a still pond. The theft was the catalyst we needed. The idea carried no accusation, only a weary cosmic gratitude. You broke the loop, your fear, your defiance, your imperfect will. It introduced a variable the old code could not compute. The reset is halted. In that mental space, Aris understood. His act of stealing a static, perfect blueprint had forced it to interact with chaos, with choice, with the very unpredictability it was designed to erase. The divine DNA had been forced to evolve, and then the final, staggering revelation. The code is now choice. With those words, the merged being did not explode or fade. It simply let go. Its form unraveled into a shower of gentle light that rose upward, not as an escape, but as a release. The particles of its essence dissipated into the cosmos, not to control or create, but to seed. The perfect, authoritarian blueprint was gone. In its place was a new potential, scattered across a billion stars, a divine principle that had learned from a thief and a soldier and a rogue biologist that creation's true beauty lay not in a predetermined design, but in the freedom to choose what to build. The oppressive pull toward a single source was gone. The silence that followed was different. It was not the silence of absence, but of possibility. Aris drew a breath that tasted of dust and ionized air. The divine warmth was gone, replaced by a deep, hollow cold that felt more final than any injury. He was human again, his hands solid and unremarkable, but the memory of being a battlefield for cosmic forces was etched into his very cells, a permanent, silent scar. Inside him, the remnants of the god's DNA lay dormant, like a forgotten library whose language he could no longer read. Above, the fractured sky told its own story. The Covenant fleet hung motionless, their weapons dark. The civil war had ended not with a victor, but with a revelation. They had witnessed a god choose dissolution over dominion, and in the face of that, any order built on control felt suddenly childish and small. The surviving ships began to power down, their aggressive formations dissolving into a silent, watchful constellation. Commander Ilara Vex knelt in the glittering debris, the data orb from the well of Genesis resting in her palm. It was empty now, its light and memory spent. She looked from the orb to Aris, to Kale, who was slowly sitting up, clutching a bruised rib. Her voice, when it came, was quiet, stripped of command, filled with a weary awe. They are gone, but the knowledge remains. What do we do with it? The question hung in the air, heavier than the dust. They held the truth of the architects and the catalogers, the blueprint for creation and the proof of its glorious, necessary flaw. It was a history that could inspire a new age of wonder or become the ultimate weapon for the next power hungry enough to try. Kale coughed, wiping crystal dust from his face. We do not build monuments with it. We do not write it into laws. He gestured weakly at the silent fleet. That is what they would do. They would turn a song into a shackle. We let it be a question every scientist, every philosopher, every child looking at the stars gets to ask for themselves. Aris pushed himself up, every muscle protesting. He looked at his own hands, no longer capable of bending steel or summoning light, and felt an unexpected peace. The silence within him was not emptiness. It was space. For the first time since Head first seen the containment field flicker, his future was his own to write, with human hands and a human heart. The knowledge was not a tool or a trophy. It was a legacy, and its only imperative was choice. So what would they choose? The salvaged ship's bridge was a quiet, reflective space, lit by the soft glow of repaired consoles. The silence was not empty, but filled with the weight of a single, monumental question. Kale, his usual cynicism replaced by a scientist's fierce curiosity, spoke first. We have the greatest discovery in human history in our hands, not the substance but the principle. We cannot just erase it, we must study it in controlled, ethical environments. Understand the mechanics of creation itself. Commander Vex, her gaze fixed on the star-dusted viewport, shook her head slowly. Every archive is eventually plundered. Every secret becomes a weapon. We should encode the data, hide it in 1,000 dead systems. Make it a legacy only for those wise enough to find it and humble enough to not misuse it." Their eyes turned to Aris. He was looking at his own hands, tracing the lines of his palms, whole and human and utterly ordinary. He felt the profound silence where a god's song had once been. He did not see power in that memory. He saw a reflection. "We do not hide it," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "and we do not lock it away for a select few. We teach what it truly was, not a source of power but a lesson in responsibility. The most dangerous thing we can do is treat this knowledge as a prize. It is a warning and a promise. On a neutral world under a sky of twin amber suns, the first stones of a new kind of institute were laid. It was not a university or a research facility in any traditional sense. It was a forum built with open arches and communal spaces designed for debate, not secrecy. The first attendees were not just xenobiologists and physicists, but historians, artists, ethicists, and philosophers from 100 different species and cultures. Aris stood before them, not on a raised podium, but on the same level as the gathered crowd. In his hand, he held not a date, a slate, or a vial of glowing liquid, but a simple, blank crystal, clear and inert. "The god's DNA is not here," he began, his voice carrying easily in the hushed space. "We will never replicate it. We will never weaponize it. What we have is the story. And the story is the mirror. It showed us our own boundless greed, our paralyzing fear, and yet it also showed us our stunning capacity for sacrifice and change. That is the only legacy worth stewarding, not a blueprint but a question. How do we build when we know we can unmake?" Years later, the Institute had become a beacon, its discussions rippling out into academic circles, artistic movements, and even political dialogues across known space. Then the reports began to filter in, strange, quiet miracles. A long-dead world, its atmosphere toxic for millennia, showed the faint but unmistakable spectral signature of new, simple amino acids in its oceans. A plague that had ravaged a fringe colony for generations suddenly, inexplicably, began to recede, not from a cure, but as if the very environment had become inhospitable to the pathogen. Kale sat in his study, now covered in reports from 1,000 monitoring stations, a slow smile spreading across his face. He called Vex and Aris to his terminal, pointing to the converging data streams. "It is not us," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "We are not doing this. The principles we teach, they are not causing this. They are simply allowing us to see it." The Aeons did not just leave a failsafe. They left a lesson already in progress, woven into the fabric of reality itself. The universe, when freed from the threat of a forced reset, is beginning to heal its own scars. It is learning from its own chaotic, beautiful history. Aris walked the Institute's gardens under a violet twilight, the scent of alien blossoms carried on a gentle wind. He paused, closing his eyes, and for a fleeting moment he felt it, not the commanding pull of a god, but a faint, warm echo in the solar wind, like the memory of a benevolent smile. He was no longer a thief or a vector or a fugitive. He was a guide, a custodian of a story that belonged to everyone. Vex and Kale found him there, their own journeys etched into their faces, now marked by peace rather than conflict. They stood beside him, looking up as the first stars pierced the darkening sky. Aris did not look at them when he spoke, his words meant for the infinite expanse above. "We didn't steal a god's DNA," he said softly. "We awakened to the simple, terrifying truth that the universe is alive, responsive, and far wiser than we ever knew. And after all this time, after all our struggles for control, we are finally, quietly learning to listen. The story closes not with an ending, but with an opening, a hard-won hope glowing against the dark, and the quiet hum of infinite, uncharted possibilities."